Just want to wish everyone a very good morning. We're happy that you all are capable of joining us. And we want to say, first off, congratulations to all of you for not only being selected as grant awardees, but for the work that you all do in the Richmond community, supporting youth, supporting sports and athletics, and just community overall, wherever that may set. We do understand that COVID-19 shelter-in-place orders and restrictions as individuals may be returning to their workplaces or places of work are impacting your service and what it is that you provide. And what we want to say is that we'll address some of those perhaps challenges as we get into some details related to the grant service agreement. But I want to introduce myself. My name is Patrick Seals. I work in the city attorney's office, and I'm also supported in the ECIA program. And myself and my partner here, Shauni Johnson, work to make this program happen. Specifically, what I do is typically manage the website for the ECIA grant. When we were eligible, or when we could really have site visits, myself and Shauni, we supported that as well. I typically review almost all of the progress reports, and last year, I really supported the organizations in assisting in drafting their scopes of work and those outcome tables that we'll get to a little bit later. And I fill in as many ways as I can to support the grantees overall. And I'll let Shauni introduce herself.
Well, hi, good morning. I'm Shauni Johnson, and I am part of the ECIA grant team. My role is to make sure the paperwork is in order. So you'll be working with me in the beginning to get your grant agreements in place and to turn in all of your required documents. All of that we'll go over during the presentation. Also, I assist with site visits. We're not sure how that's going to look this year, but if we do have site visits, if we're able to come out there, you'll most likely see Patrick and I. As he mentioned, he reviews the progress reports, and I will do that in the case that he's unable to, but I pretty much look at your invoices. So I'm looking at all of the supporting documentation, and I am the one that will give the approval to finance to get your payments out to you. So together, Patrick and I, we're pretty much running this program, and we're hoping that we could fast track it this year because we're already a little behind our timeline, and we're hoping that we can get you your funds as soon as possible. I just want to share with you that there is a question and answer function here. So we are going to be holding on to, we're going to hold questions. We'll let you know when we're able to take them, and we'll allow you to raise your hand and talk, or if you have any questions while we're presenting, go ahead and submit them to the question and answers. We're going to be looking at them and see if we can answer your question throughout the presentation. You have anything that you want to say? Okay, and with that, we're going to get started, and we'll be, we did email some documents to you for reference. We sent you the PowerPoint slide deck. We're going to be showing it on the screen, but for those of you who prefer, you also should have it in your email. All right, and let's see.
Okay. Okay, so here is the agenda for the day. We've just completed our welcome and introduction, and our next step is to talk about finalizing your grant service agreements, which is going to be very, very important. Address how you'll actually receive your grant funds or awarded disbursements. Invoicing and reporting, which is some responsibilities that you have to assure that you receive all the funds that were awarded to you, and that you're also communicating to us what your program has been doing, challenges you face, some highlights, etc. We'll address in the case that you need to make any adjustments to your scope, to your timeline, and or to your budget. We'll address how to do that through a contract or budget amendment. And we'll address site visits, capacity and support, and we'll follow up with Q&A at the end there. So please take notes please take note of any questions you have during the presentation because we'll be trying to address those at the end of our presentation. So finalizing the grant service agreement, which you should have all received in addition to the PowerPoint slide deck, looks something like this. The grant service agreement is going to address the terms of your agreement and the timeline, the scope of work, and it will require that you have certain documents submitted to us, which are required to enter into a grant agreement here with the City of Richmond, and address execution, which is basically a fancy word for saying you've got everything in place and you're ready to move forward. So when we think about the terms, one of the things that we're thinking about, or we need to make sure is that we understand, is that the ECIA grant is a reimbursement grant, which means that you expend funds, you gather all the documents that support the funds that have been expended, you submit those documents to us for review, and we then will have a check dispersed to you in the amount that was spent. So you pay, and then we pay you for what you pay, which is simple reimbursement. We're working off the fiscal year, which is to say that some of you may have programming that may work off the calendar year. However, you can't put in requests for funds expended outside of this term. So hypothetically, let's say you have a summer program that started June 1st and runs through maybe August 31st. You couldn't submit any funding requests for snacks, backpacks, workbooks that you maybe purchased from June 1st to June 30th. You can only then begin once July 1st hits and forward. And finally, and we can get into more detail, I think, with some of this a little bit later, for those of you that will be providing support or services to young people or vulnerable populations, you will need to demonstrate that the staff that is directly working with those individuals and supporting them have had background checks. That's very important to us. We take that very seriously. So here is just a bit of an overview of some of the terms of the grant service agreement. So when we look at the scope of work, right, the service specifications are specifically drawn out. What we're hoping to do is we send out a document or a series of documents to you that were in the award email. It was quite a lengthy email, quite detailed email with quite a few attachments. We would hope that you would review that very carefully, and also the attachments, because that is a part of how you actually enter into and we finally are capable of executing our scope. So the service specs really are going to be drawn from your application, and specifically for you all, if you review your application, sections 2B, section 3A, and also section 3B, you can see that it asks specific questions. And just to kind of condense it, really those questions get at what are what is your program going to do? Who is your program going to serve? Where are you going to provide those services, right? It really gets at those three major questions, but in great detail. And on the grant service agreement, we're looking for the service specs in the template that we sent you. It's called a scope drafting template. We're looking for you to go to your application, go to these sections, and then craft a narrative that really explains to us in detail what you're going to do, who you're going to serve, what they're going to get, what benefit they'll receive, and where you're going to be serving them. When we move on to the timeline, if you look at your application, you will go to section 2C and then basically copy section 2C from your application into the scope drafting template was sent for you. And again, I just want to highlight as I'm discussing this section that we do understand that as a consequence of COVID, right, some of these things might be changing, right? And we are aware of that, and we are amenable to the necessary changes that you need to make. So when you're looking at your service specs and timelines and outcomes as we move further in discussing them, please take it into consideration. Please have a series of discussions with your team and your staff, program managers, those that will actually be carrying out your program, to figure out, okay, are we still capable of moving forward as we put forth in our application? As far as our timeline, will we need to move things back and have everything be hosted in the spring? Those are all considerations that you'll need to take into. For your outcomes, you will look to your application, sections 3C and 3D in your application, take that table, and then transfer that to the scope drafting template, which is a Word document that was sent to you. I'm trying to repeat myself over and over just so that the nomenclature related to what we'll be having you do is something that becomes more familiar. Look to your application, and this section really is the major part of how we'll be evaluating you, right? So one of the major or simple examples that we often use in our presentations is backpack giveaways. And if it's backpack giveaways, what are the, maybe that support education preparedness, and how we do that is backpack giveaways. How we do that is we gather backpacks and supplies and distribute them. The measure is we want to provide 800 backpacks to schools, and our evaluation metric is that we're going to do a simple tabulation. And finally, your budget template, again, because I don't think everyone received their full ask, we assume that your budget template will be adjusted, but look to your budget template that was part of your application. Look at the scope drafting template sent to you. If you receive less funds, you'll have to have a series of discussions and make some changes. And as a consequence of COVID, you might as well also. And now I'm going to turn it over to Shauni to discuss required docs.
Okay, so the required documents, in order for us to get a grant agreement in place, you have to have certain required documents. So we first have to establish your vendor profile. If you are new to the city of Richmond or new working with the city of Richmond, most likely you've never done this. So you'll need to have a W-9 completed as well as a vendor supplemental questionnaire. If you have done business with the city and have received a payment, then you can skip this step. You do not need to have a vendor profile set up. You also, all organizations are required to have a business license. So if you don't have a business license yet, you can refer to the email that we sent to you, and it has instructions on how to go online and complete the application. It's a fairly simple application for nonprofits. I think the cost is $1 for a nonprofit. It's just more about going in and uploading your documents to show that you're a nonprofit. And we will need a copy of that business license. You're also going to be required to give us your insurance certificate. And the insurance must be accompanied by an additional insured endorsement. So that's an area where we've had some issues in the past. So we want to see your insurance certificate showing your general liability, and we have some examples that we can provide to you, but we want to make sure that we have that additional insured endorsement that says the city of Richmond is also named as an insured. Another thing is the electronic funds transfer form. That's something that we're doing new this year. The EFT form will allow us to go ahead and just put the check, we'll give the payment approval to finance, and you'll have your funds the next day. So we are really pushing that. It's recommended. We would like for everyone to sign up, and that doesn't just stick to our program. That'll be whenever you do business with the city of Richmond and we issue a check to you, you'll be able to get it electronically. So those are required documents that we will need to receive from you. I'll be sending out an email to every organization with the specific amount that you were awarded, and then asking you for those documents. And if you have any questions at that time, if you reply via email, then I'll assist you there. Once we get all of those documents, we're now gonna go into executing the agreement. So the scope of work that Patrick spoke about, he's gonna assist with crafting the scope of work, and I'll probably be on that team as well. Once your scope of work is approved, then we will send you the entire agreement for you to sign and return back to us. At that time that you return back your signed agreement, it's encouraged that you also make sure that all of your required documents are submitted. We will route that agreement for signature, and once the agreement is routed, we will return a copy back to you, and that'll be your executed agreement to say you now are ready to begin billing us if you like. There's a couple ways in which you can bill us. So it's a reimbursement grant, as Patrick had mentioned, but we also allow advanced payments for organizations. What we found is that a lot of organizations that are smaller don't necessarily have the money to front up front. So what we're doing is we're giving you the opportunity to ask us for a 50% initial advance. That advance is to be requested via a form. And do you have the name of that form, the exact name of it?
Yes.
The form is on our website, and it's called the advance payment form. You're gonna go online and you'll complete the initial advance form. It's pretty plug and play. Put your organization's name there. It'll ask you, was 50% of the amount that you were awarded? You'll complete that and send it over to us. You would send that, if you're gonna request an advance, you would send that advance payment along with your signed agreement. Once the agreement is signed, I'll automatically go ahead and take care of the advance payment. You're also eligible for an additional advance payment of 35% after the first 50% payment has been used. The additional payment, we're only going to give it to you if you've completed your progress report and if you have turned in all of your supporting documentation for the 50% initial advance. So some of you may have already received this grant before, you may know a little bit about this. We pretty much hold your hand through it. We're expecting that your first 50% will take you halfway through your grant funded program. So if you request that you want say you have a program that's going from July 1st into June 30th of the next year. So yours is gonna run the entire year. We're gonna expect that that first 50% is gonna take you from July through December. Sometimes it doesn't happen that way, but for the most part it does. And so come the end of December, you submit all of your backup documentation, we approve it, and now you're ready for your additional 35% advance. The last 15% is always reserved until completion. So while we're going to advance the first 50 and the second advance will be 35%, the very last portion of that money, that 15%, will be the organization's responsibility to front that money until the end of your agreement. So I just want to make sure that that's clear, that the last 15% you will have to front on your own. This slide right here just pretty much tells you that the initial advance has to be a formal request. It's going to be on the letterhead that we have. And again, it's going to be on our website, and that the 35% is contingent on submission. Reimbursement, should you choose not to do the advance and you just want to do a reimbursement grant. Some of the organizations are large enough where they say, we just want to do a reimbursement only. There's only 2 times that you can submit for your reimbursement. It's going to be at mid-year, and then it's going to be the final. So mid-year comes around January. I think in our grant agreement, it says that your report and your progress reports and all your invoices is due around January 31st. And so that's when you would be able to submit reimbursement. Every reimbursement request must be accompanied by a progress report, as well as your invoice, including the supporting documents. And then at the very end, you'll be able to request your final reimbursement, and that comes around July, if your program is running an entire year. So with the invoice and reimbursement requests, we have an invoice template. That template is on our website. The template is made to mirror the budget that you filled out during your original application that you submitted. We can show you a picture of that. So this is our invoice template. It has a space at the top for the date. We do ask that you assign every invoice an invoice number. It has a space for your vendor number, which you'll be provided with at the time that your contract is executed, as well as a contract number that'll also be provided at that time. You would put on the program project line the name of your project, your program, the service period. So if this is a reimbursement request, then you would do your service period for the first half. So if you have a 1-year program, and I say if you have a 1-year program because some of our grantees have a service period that's less time. So if you have a 1-year program, then that service period would be from July 1st through December 30th. The budget item where it says personnel expenses and total budget, when you submitted your application, this may look similar, or this may look familiar to you. When you submitted your application, there's a line for personnel expenses and program expenses. You would put exactly what you had on your application that was approved, or not on the application, I'm sorry, what was approved on your scope of work. Because some of you may have submitted an application and we didn't give you your full ask, and so we have to work with you to revise the budget. So once you have your executed agreement, it will have the budget in there. And what you will do is you will just duplicate that information from the budget table, and you would complete this table. So Patrick's doing an example right now. For instance, if you had staff as personnel expenses, your total budget was $15,000, you would put $15,000 there in that line. So say program expenses, you had supplies, and for supplies you had another $5,000. So if you see that at the very bottom, it will total up for you and show you that your total budget was $20,000. So what we want you to do is tell us how much money have you spent for staff for the period for which you're reporting. So if this is for the first half, you would tell us exactly how much you spent for the first half of the program. Now you'll notice that we put exactly half of the money there on the example, but that doesn't mean that you have to use exactly half. You may use more or you may use less. What we care about is that you're accurately telling us how much money you've used during that term. And the same would be for program expenses. And so at the very end, it'll tell you year to date what you've spent, and then it'll tell you your remaining balance that you have to spend down. And so at the very bottom, oh, are we still there? Okay, so at the very bottom, the total grant award, there you would just fill in the information that it's asking for. If you did an advance payment, then you would put what your advance payment is. That's more of an internal thing for us, but we do ask that you guys make sure that you put the information there. And whatever your current invoice total is that you're asking for, which in this case would have been half of the money, 10,000, you would fill that in. So it's really plug and play. We're hoping that it works that way. We've had success with this format, but we're always open to feedback if there's anything that you guys notice. Give me a second to get back. Okay, so basically line items have to match the approved budget. We want to make sure that all the services are itemized, and hard copies are preferred. I know that there's a pandemic. A lot of people don't want to touch papers. They don't want to do things. So we are open this year to electronic copies, but hard copies are definitely preferred. If you do send an electronic copy of your invoice and progress report packet, we just ask that it already be together instead of it coming across as 5 different files that we have to piece together. We're asking that you already put it together as one PDF and send it over to us. Okay, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to Patrick, and we're going to talk a little bit about tracking the program expenses.
Shauni. We appreciate you all putting questions. We're responding as best we can. And again, we'll have a little time here. I think we're doing really good on time. So I feel like we're going to have ample time to respond to any detailed questions. And we'll be able to also provide, if you have follow-ups, you can email us, call us, schedule some time to chat. So as Shauni was talking about the invoices and how to complete that form, we have taken a great deal of time to make sure that those forms work appropriately. And in addition to completing your invoice form, here is the documents that we anticipate will be backing up or be attached to that invoice form. So if there have been purchases made by your organization, for example, supplies, right? So in our backpack giveaway and school supply example that I mentioned earlier, if there were purchases at, for example, Target and backpacks were purchased, pencils were purchased, erasers, calculators, paper, those types of items to be included in your backpacks, we would want to see receipts of all of those things from Target. We need legible receipts. And I hate to say this, but we've gotten receipts that were faded and scratched out and grocery lists and kids' homeworks written on them. Make sure they're legible is what I'm saying. If you're paying people, staff, what we'd like to see is payroll records. And if you, for example, are having contractors to support your work and you pay them via check, we want to see copies of canceled checks or bank statements that show that the vendor or your contractor actually received the funds, drew down on the funds. And If, for example, you're doing stipends for college students or high school students perform work. So let's say you're going to give a $500 stipend over the summer to some young people who are going to be at the park giving away those backpacks. They need to do, 30 hours over the summer at different locations disseminating or handing out backpacks. And you say they're going to do 30 hours. We'll want to see timesheets that just note, not only did you pay them, write them a check for the $500, but we have their name, we know what dates that the work was provided. And I'm going to go back to invoices just because we've run into this problem. On your invoices, if you're creating those, or if people are submitting them to you, and this might be also for the fiscal sponsors out there that are submitting documents for organizations, the invoices need to note who the vendor was, the work they performed, the date ranges that they performed the work, what they actually did, right? So what we wouldn't really find acceptable is, hypothetically, you hire someone to do a task for you and they submit an invoice and you pay them and you submit receipts or an invoice and it says, John Doe services, and in the description, John Doe performed task, and it says $3,500, right? And your grant program runs from July 1st to June 30th. We don't find that sufficient. We want to know, how frequently did your vendor or contractor perform those services? Which dates or date ranges? Which months did they perform that work? How frequently did they perform that work? We want some detail there. And so that's going to be very important to us, and we can also do some follow-up later. But overall, as we were showing the invoice template, for reimbursement and or receive future advance payments, we anticipate that you will include these documents as backup. And again, if there are ever questions about if something is sufficient, we would actually prefer that you give us a call and let us know before you submit, hey, this is what I'm thinking about submitting. Is this sufficient? So that we don't waste your time and we can get the checks processed in a timely manner. I'm sorry, Shauni wants to make a point. You want to go back a slide?
And so we have a question out there, and I want to answer it live. So there's a question about, if you receive the advance payment, if you receive the advance payment, would you have to turn in an invoice at mid-year? And so at mid-year, your progress report is due, no matter what. Your invoice or the backup documentation showing how you use the 50% advance, that is due when you have used all of those funds. So at mid-year, say we were giving you $5,000, say we gave you $5,000 advance payment at the beginning, and then at mid-year, you've only used $4,500. Then no, we would not expect for you to turn in an invoice showing how you use that money. We want to see your invoice once you've expended the entire advance payment. So I hope that answers the question on when that's due. Basically, with the reimbursement, we want to make sure, we don't want to see it in pieces and you've spent this much here or there. We want to see it once you've completed that and then when you're ready to ask for your next advance.
Okay. Okay. So, I think we've covered invoices, and we may get further questions at the completion of our presentation, and we are almost done. And then we can maybe return to some sections and provide some more clarity. As Shauni said, the reporting. So we've talked about invoicing. Now we're talking here about reporting. We anticipate that we will receive a progress report at the midpoint of your program. And again, if we're working off of the assumption that your program will span a year, July 1 to June 30th, then the midpoint of your program would be end of December. And we'll give you 30 days to submit that. So you'll have until January 31st to submit a progress report. And that is regardless of whether you have submitted your invoice or you've expended all your funds. Typically, right, we would anticipate that if we're at the midpoint of your program, you will have spent half of your funds and we'll be getting an invoice and a progress report. At the end of your program term, we expect a final report. And we have grant report templates, which are on the ECIA grants webpage. It's a link on the side there, a menu bar on the side there that will take you to the grant report templates and forms that you'll need to complete the requirements that we're sharing with you here today. Again, typically we would require hard copies as our preference, but again, we are okay with receiving electronic copies of the documents. As Shauni stated before, we would request that you make it easy for us to process that by making them one file and versus as a PDF versus sending 7 attachments separately. And I'll just say this as a point of clarity. When it's easy for us and to understand your progress report and understand your invoicing and the backup documentation is really clear, it allows for us to expedite payment. When we have questions or things are unclear, it can slow down your processing. And so a suggestion might be, if you were to submit your packet, let's say you're submitting a mid-year progress report and an invoice for reimbursement with backup given you had an advance, show it to somebody who doesn't know anything about your program and your organization, and don't tell them anything, and see if they can discern or decipher what's going on. And if they can't, then how do you make that clear for them? Because that'll make it really clear for us. And we've been looking at these things for 5 years, and we understand again that, so for some of you, may not be what you do consistently, right? But again, I would recommend if there are questions about whether something is sufficient, whether it's clear, how to assemble a packet, we're giving you the steps here, but as you begin to do it, if you have a question, send us an email, share it with us and say, okay, I'm getting ready to submit this. Is this right? Will this be sufficient? So that, again, we can expedite payment. Grant amendments. So we have on the grant, ECI grants page, for forms, the menu bar, there's a grant reporting forms. There's something called a grant amendment. And what it really does is it allows you to amend your scope, timeline, or budget. Things happen, especially during the time that we're in, as you all are making adjustments and maneuvering and pivoting to continue to do the work that you do amidst certain restrictions and shelter-in-place orders and health guidelines, et cetera. You're already considering some changes. This form allows for you to communicate to us, hey, something happened, maybe we got another grant, and so the money that we were going to spend in one place, we don't need in that place. We got in-kind donations that allow for something. Actually, somebody left, we had a staff member leave, and so a part of the program that individual was going to perform, we can no longer do. And so what we'd either like to do is to amend our scopes to say that we're going to do less, or hypothetically maybe more, to amend our timeline to say, hey, we're need less time or hypothetically more, or to amend your budget to say, hey, the money that we're going to spend in this area, we would like to move that money to another line, or we'd like to create another line. And this form really allows some dexterity and accommodations that we all understand are going to happen through the life of certain grant cycles. And so this is a form that we recommend. We also recommend that you communicate to us this information. So what we don't want to see is you submit an invoice and you've changed it, right? Because you've changed your scope, you changed your timeline, you moved things to budget, and you haven't alerted us to that. So before you make those changes, you need to submit this form to us. Because if we receive an invoice with backup that's got changes on it because you've remembered that we can make changes without this form, then the invoice is going to be rejected. We're going to then have to have a conversation with you. And so here's the sequence, right? If you anticipate that there will be changes, have a conversation with us, complete the grant form, we approve it, and then you're good to go. Site visits and capacity building. This is something we've been echoing throughout this presentation is in prior years, we hosted at least one site visit with almost all of the organizations. Currently with the health considerations related to COVID and its spread, we may either suspend that temporarily for a period, we may host them later, or what we may do is just set up a series of conversations, right? So we might have some virtual meetings with organizations just to check in, hear what's going on, et cetera. As a consequence of COVID as well, we had to suspend our capacity building because we were initially going to be hosting people. And so right now we're working on that. So just keep an eye out because we do want to provide support. And finally, these things are still available, the additional support. We as staff are available to meet with you personally and provide some really tailored direction to you regarding your programming and your outlook. We can make maybe some space available if people needed that. And we're also willing to make connections. For example, it might be something that you might want to do and not only just look at who else received a grant, but you might be interested in being introduced to some of the organizations that received a grant. And we would be happy to make introductions for you if you see an opportunity to partner in a way to build your organization's strength or reach or capacity. And so those are all opportunities. Finally, I want to say that when we talked about the scope drafting situation, I'll be reaching out, and so will Shauni. Will be reaching out to you all. Want you all to submit your scopes, and then we're going to probably schedule 45-minute hour sessions to review it, to finalize it, and then to begin entering that information into your grant service agreement. And so that will be a subsequent call. So at this point, I don't know if Richard's still on. Or okay, sure. And so contact information. For us, please email us if you have questions. Here's our mailing address, and Shauni and I are really responsible for the ECIA grant at this point. LaShonda is still a part of our team, but she has some new responsibilities, and so she won't really be able to participate in as many parts of this as she has in the past. She did send her greetings, and she's excited to see what you all are doing, and wants to really support you all. And so so at this point, I don't know how it works if people
So at this point, we want to open it up for some questions. And we do have questions that were coming in that we have been answering. Give us a second to just read through and kind of answer some of these. I'm not sure if you guys can see the answer or the questions that are coming in and the answers that we're typing. But I am going to go over some of the questions that we have, just some of the ones that are general. One is
They're all answered questions.
so they're under, and if you guys were to click on the question and answer at the bottom of the screen, it will show you some of the questions and some of the answers. One of them is whether or not this will be recorded and sent out. And so, yes, we are going, this is being recorded, and we will put a copy, or we'll put a link on our website. There's a question about the invoices. Some of these questions, I think I'd feel better just kind of talking to the organizations. They can submit them via email, or we can have a conversation, because it looks like they may know what kind of invoices they're going to get. So it's saying whether or not services and goods can be together on an invoice. I could talk more with your organizations about invoices that you think you're going to get and what we need from you. The grant service agreement, we're also doing something a little different this year, where we're going to have a column that will say what your budget is, how much, and we'll tell you what items we need from you in order to support your reimbursement request. So I think that's going to be very helpful. We've done it for a few organizations in previous years. And so it's something we're going to do for everyone moving forward, so that it's really clear on what items you could turn into us that would satisfy our requirements. Let's see. So if you do have a question, if you want to ask it, please go ahead and use the raise hand feature, and then we will call on you to see if you have anything. You see some, okay.
Do you want me to bring them in?
Melinda McCrary.
Okay, I apologize. Patrick answered my question in the chat. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so Diego Garcia. Let's see, you're unmute. You have to unmute, Diego.
There you go. Can you hear me, Shauni?
I can hear you.
So I understand about the grant amendment form. However, we're just a little bit concerned because our program relates to youth sports programs in the fall season. And I know we're going to have a new wave of this COVID or the flu. So I'm not too sure how shelter in place is going to take place or look like it at that time. So when do we do the grant amendment in that case?
So we anticipate that you're already going to be changing your scope and your timeline as a consequence of COVID right now. So you already know, hey, we're moving to spring. So when you're completing your form, your stuff may all be in spring. If when you get to spring, right, and you sense, hey, we need to make another change. It's not that you have to do a budget amendment. It's not like it's a requirement. It's if you think you need to change something after you've submitted your scope and we finalize the grant service agreement, and you feel like, hey, something's come up that we didn't foresee, and as a consequence, we need to change our scope, our timeline, our budget. It's an option when you need it. It's not a requirement that you submit a budget amendment.
Got it. Okay.
All right, Amit.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so my question is that we hope to draft our scope of work with the assumption that the shelter in place is lifted in a few months' time. Alternatively, we can draft it with the assumption that the shelter in place doesn't lift at all through the grant period. would one of those be more appropriate than the other? Whether the shelter in place lifts will kind of determine how many Richmond residents we can serve throughout the grant period.
I don't know that I have a preference. And so what I would recommend is that you do what you think is most likely to happen, right? So if you work in the health industry, what are your physicians? Meet with your staff. What is the percentage? Are you more hopeful that it will be lifted, or are you more hopeful that it won't? We don't know for certain either way. And so I don't know that we have a preference. Again, this is an opportunity where the budget amendment will come in. So there is no wrong way to do this, because we provided a tool, an instrument to assist you if you need to make changes.
And I like to say that, given that the grant agreements are gonna be drafted after July 1st and your program starting July 1st, right? So we're gonna start calling folks and scheduling those appointments to draft the agreement. I think you should draft the agreement on what you're able to do right now. And if it changes and if you're able to do something else, then we'll do that. But I think you should draft it on what you're able to do right now. Does that answer for you?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Angela Cox.
Okay, so my question is, in the vendor agreement, they provide both personnel and goods as well as services. What if those items are not separated and itemized out? You're paying someone, actually a company, and they're also providing goods and services. Do you want those things separated? Or if I show you the hard copy with the contract that includes everything, is that sufficient?
So the invoices, that's going to be your responsibility to figure out how you are going to present your invoice to us. So when you bill us, you're going to tell us if you're billing us for personnel or if you're billing us for goods. And if it's for personnel or for goods, we need that backup. So if that was from the vendor and you have one invoice that includes everything, as long as you're able to put that with your invoice to us. We don't, when you're billing us, the organization has to bill us. We don't want, I'm trying to figure out how to say, we want to make sure that you're able to show us proof of what you paid, right? Mm-hmm. So if you have someone where they billed you and it's for personnel expenses and something else, you need to be able to break that out for us. You have to make sure that we can see it. And if it's all together and you have to give us an agreement or you have to show us where it is that it breaks it out, you have to provide us with all that info. We just need it to be clear on our end. But we don't have a preference one way or another, but you just need to make sure that it's clear to us where you are asking for reimbursement.
Thank you.
Ann Brenner?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. I saw a couple of questions in the chat box about electronic versus hard copy signatures. And I know that you covered that really clearly in terms of invoicing and reporting, and just wondering if we could talk a little bit more about that with regards to the grant agreement in terms of what will suffice for signature requirements.
So the grant agreement, in the past, just so you guys know, the City of Richmond, the clerk's office handles the grant agreements, or I'm sorry, they handle all of our contracts. And it's their requirement that we have hard copy signatures, originals, wet signatures. However, given that COVID happened, it's a pandemic, they have allowed for flexibility. And so we are accepting electronic signatures. However, I don't know that we're equipped to do DocuSign or anything of that nature. So we're asking that you print it out, you sign it with your original signature, but you're free to go ahead and scan it back as a PDF to us. At least we still have your original signature. And that way we know that the documents will go through without being kicked back to us.
Got it, thank you.
You're welcome. And we're going to go ahead and take this last question because we want to be respectful of everyone's time. That will be from Nadia Winters.
Hi, thank you. I actually asked this in the chat, but so we're PTA and we may be reimbursing our school budget to pay our vendor, which is the grant agreement will be towards the vendor. So I'm wondering if that's possible or if we should just cut out the school intermediary and we have to show that we're paying the vendor directly. Does that make sense?
I'm not quite sure what you mean, but what I do want to say is that we can address that once we begin drafting your scope and your budget. Again, on everyone's scope or on everyone's agreement, there's going to be a scope, there's going to be a budget table, and that budget table is going to tell you the documents that we are willing to accept as proof for that reimbursement. So yours seems like it might just be a little bit more specialized to the PTA, so we can talk about that offline.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, thank you.
Okay, and so with that, we will go ahead and conclude this. We want to say, oh, I'm sorry, we're gonna go to the next steps.
Well, we just talked to them.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry about that.
No worries. So what we anticipate will happen is that we're anticipating that we're going to receive draft scopes from you all a week from today. So those are due a week from today. And as they come in, I'll be reaching out, and Shauni may also be coordinating some of this to schedule a 45-minute hour session to go over your scopes of work. We would want that call to be an opportunity for us to finalize. Typically, we would receive the scopes via email back edits, receive the scopes, and it just extended the timeline. And it's much easier to go ahead and spend an hour together, which some people feel can be laborious, but it's much more effective to have that hour-long conversation. And when we both leave the room, the scope of work is finalized, and then I can say, Shauni, the scope is good, and she can stick it in the grant service agreement, and then we're moving forward. So we anticipate that you all will be working on your scopes of work. Please reach out to us as they come in. I'm going to be scheduling some time to sit with you and chat and ask questions. And when we do schedule that, make sure that you and or whoever is participating in that call can speak to the scope, can answer questions, because I will be inquiring of some things to get clarity. But I feel like it's a very fruitful process. I feel like the organizations typically experience that with me leave and they feel like it's been a benefit. That is going to be our immediate next steps. Again, you have the documents as well, your required documents. You should be working on that stuff as well. And if you have questions that you didn't bring up here as you complete, you want to reach out to us, please do. We're available. We want you to succeed. We want you to do this. We want it to be clear. And so if we can help with that, we'd like to.
Yeah, everything that Patrick said. And please start working on your required documents now. Some of them take a little bit of time. Insurance, if you don't already have it in place, could take a little bit of time. The business license, you have to give our business license department time to be able to do that. So if you don't already have some of this stuff in place, please start working on it now. It will make it so much easier if those required documents are in place at the time that we talk to you about your scope. And the goal is to get you money as soon as possible. And with everything in place, that's what we'll be able to do. So with that, thank you guys for attending today. If you have any questions, email us and we'll be in contact.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.